I so appreciate when the epistle and the gospel dovetail so well. The epistle and gospel today work together perfectly to deliver a powerful gospel message. We often hear the message, if you see something, say something. That's what you hear on the metro in Washington, D.C. all the time. And that is about safety. Today's message is about if you see something, do something. Because that is what we're called to do as disciples of Christ. In Paul's epistle, he's appealing to the Gentiles. He wants them to understand why it is important that they support the Christian Jews in Jerusalem. Remember that the Christian Jews at this time were mostly without a place to worship because they had been booted out of their synagogues. Paul's point is that this community here in Corinth really should be supporting the community there in Jerusalem because, after all, they were in need. And we, and I do mean the royal we, are really members of the same team. We're members of the same church, and we worship the same God. One Christian is as grace-filled as the next in God's eyes. There is no distinction, except maybe in our own minds. In our gospel today, we are in the middle of Jesus rushing off with Jairus, a synagogue leader who is fairly high on the social scale, and they are headed to Jairus' house to save his dying daughter. The crowds are following close behind the group, and we can almost feel the frenzy and the crush. When all of a sudden, Jesus feels that his power has been tapped. Who did that? Says Jesus. And everyone comes to a standstill. Think for a minute about everything that's going on here. Jesus has stopped short in the middle of a top priority healing house call to hear a very sad story from a very poor woman who is bowing prostrate before him. Jairus is frantic. We can hear the clock tick, tick, tick. The disciples are like, "Who cares who touched you? We've got to go. A life is at stake." As it turned out, there was more than one life at stake. The woman in the crowd's story is similar and yet different from that of Jairus' daughter's story. Jairus' daughter was innocent, 12 years old, and dying. We can assume that she probably lived a good and comfortable life until she became sick. And now she lay on her bed at death's door. The woman in the crowd, though, was also at death's door. You don't necessarily hear it in the gospel unless you check out the Greek translation. And that translation backs this up for me by the use of the word eschaton. Eschaton means last things, last days, last moments. She had been hemorrhaging for as long as Jairus' daughter had been alive. She had not lived a comfortable life. She was at the opposite end of the social scale. More than that, she was unclean and had been seen that way by her community for 12 years. That meant no one touched her, no one welcomed her into their homes, and she was certainly not allowed at synagogue. And because she had seen every doctor she could, she was broke, and sadly, more ill than when she started. She too was soon going to die. Then she took a huge risk by joining the crowd, stretching out her hand and touching Jesus' robe. The result was instant healing. Her faith made her well, and Jesus called her daughter, which I bet was the nicest name that she had been called in 12 years. At this point, Jairus has received the news that his daughter has died. There was no reason to go to the house, and yet Jesus says, "Do not fear, only believe." So they go. Jesus took his inner circle, Peter, James, John, and the parents with him into the girl's room, and then he raised Jairus' daughter from death. In a matter of what seems like minutes for us, Jesus saves the lives of two women through God's glory. And for us, he levels the playing field between the two and gives us a lot to consider. What are we to make of these two connected messages? First, I ask you to notice that Jesus' miracles and God's grace are meant for all. And I mean everyone, regardless of just about anything. The Apostle Paul would also like for me to add that you remember this. We are given so much grace, which Paul describes as unearned love, that we should, as Christians, make it our priority to act on what we see. So, what does it look like today to see a contemporary Jesus doing what Mark's Jesus was doing? Well, before 10:30 yesterday morning, I'm not sure I would have known exactly what to say. But now I do, because yesterday I met Sedgwick. I pulled up to the recycling center outside of the Easton Amish market, and as I was getting situated, I noticed an elderly woman and her home health care aide standing outside of their car in the heat, talking and pointing to their tire. And a young man had walked up with his dog on a leash, and he was talking to them, and they were communicating, and everybody was looking and pointing at that tire. And as I watched the young man try to get down and feel around the tire, he was having a heck of a time because the dog was like, come on, Dad, let's go. And so I thought, I can help. So I got out of the car and I asked the man, "Do you think your dog would let me hold the leash?" And he said, "Absolutely, she's very friendly." So I held the leash, and as he's checking out what's happening, the elderly lady explains to us that she lives just a couple doors down from the Amish market, and her driveway had been repaved 2 days ago, and they had laid an 8x10 tarp on top of the driveway. And when she backed out of her garage, across the tarp where it had gotten sticky because of the heat and the asphalt. It got wrapped up in her tire, and they only made it a few houses before the noise started and the car started to bump along, and so they pulled into the recycle center to check it out. And after 10 minutes or so, this lovely man who was helping was able to extract the tarp from behind the tire that had also gotten up to a certain extent into the engine. And the lady said to him, "Sir, you have been so kind. Can't I pay you for being so good to us?" And the man said, "No, thank you. This is what I do these days. My name is Sedgwick, and I used to own a restaurant in Easton called the Wildflower Cafe. And just a few months ago, I was diagnosed with early onset of Alzheimer's at the age of 55. My wife and my 2 children are going to be taking care of me. And for now, I'm not too bad. And what I can do every day is I can walk my dog by myself to the dog park and back. And when I do that, I watch along the way for people who need help. And if I can help, I help them." And so we thanked him. He didn't ask for a blessing, but I told him what a good servant he was. And I watched him walk off with his dog. And I cried all the way home to Oxford. And I thanked God for showing me what a contemporary Jesus looks like today. So as followers of Christ, what is ours to do is to watch for anyone in need, those who are obvious and those who are not so obvious, and especially watch for those who are on the fringes of our community. And don't worry about what you can do, just do something, because it's going to be perfect, whatever it is. What God wants for God's people is that we all have enough support, enough resources, enough recognition, enough voice, enough respect, and most importantly, enough love. Because love is what it's all about. May it be so.